Hello and welcome. Coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. My name is Aron Korenblit, and this is the second Workflow series. I am so excited to be back here with you. Let me know in the chat if you're joining us today. Already seeing a lot of folks saying hi. So welcome Darren, welcome Bullshark, Ozardi, Mache. Hopefully I'm saying that right. I am so excited that you joined us here today, and I'm particularly excited about what we're going to cover. So seeing a big wave here. So I'm gonna try to read everyone. Lars, welcome. Alex, Dead, Grayson, super excited. And thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you'll learn something and kind of be able to build better workflows. So if you're joining us for the first time, Workflow series is a series where I help you work better, create more powerful workflows in Webflow. So as you know, Webflow allows you to build beautiful websites, but I'm here to show you that it can also build more powerful websites and make them the center of your business. So welcome, super excited. We've got a lot to cover today, so I do want to get into today's topic. So 2 weeks ago, I showed you how to connect Webflow to HubSpot. And in that, I showed you how to connect to one tool, and we kind of covered the basics of APIs. But you know, as much as I know, that one tool is not enough to run a business. Your business probably runs 10, 20, 25 different tools that need to come together in order to you to orchestrate your workflows. So our goal for today is to connect Webflow to more tools, right? So we're going to cover not one, not two, but three most popular tools that have been connected in Webflow Logic, namely Airtable, Mailchimp, and Slack. Now, even if you don't use those specific tools, I don't want you to kind of tune out. What I'm going to show you today is applicable across any tool that you use. We're going to be using the building blocks of the web, namely APIs, to show you how to connect Webflow to those tools that I mentioned. And any tool that you use probably has an API you can connect to. So even if you don't use those tools in your everyday workflows, I'm sure that what you'll learn today will be applicable. And yes, we're going to do this in under 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Give me 50 minutes. I think I can cover those three tools, or at least teach you the basics of how to connect to those tools. And we are going to, hopefully, if I did this right, cover those three things. So more precisely, what are we going to do today? So our agenda is we're going to first connect Webflow to Airtable. We're going to go ahead and create records in Airtable when a form is submitted in Webflow. Next, we're going to go ahead and connect to Mailchimp, which is a popular email marketing service that allows you to send emails, build landing pages, and things like that. And then third, we're going to send a Slack message using a Slack bot whenever a form is submitted. So that's our agenda for today. I'm going to go through Airtable, Mailchimp, and Slack, and I'll provide you a brief overview of how to connect Webflow to Webflow forms to Webflow Logic if you didn't join us 2 weeks ago. So I'm super excited. It seems like there's some doubt in the chat whether we can actually cover this in 50 minutes. I'm here to tell you, trust me, I think we can. I have confidence in myself and confidence in you all for following along and getting into it. Before I jump in, the three things you're going to need for today is first, make sure you have a Webflow account. So go to webflow.com, make yourself an account. Second, make sure you have access to Webflow Logic. So go to webflow.com/logic to get access to the beta. And then third, every tool we're covering today has access for free to their API. So it both has a free offering and accessing their API is free. So you can replicate step by step everything we're going to do today in your own websites. Okay, with that, let me bring back the agenda. So step one, let's go into Airtable, provide a brief overview of how to connect forms to Webflow Logic, and then create records in Airtable from form submissions in Airtable. Excited? I'm super excited. Let's go ahead and jump in here. So I'm here in my Webflow Designer, and my goal here is how do I connect this form to Webflow Logic? So I want these form submissions to be available in Webflow Logic so I can go ahead and do actions, steps, automations on top of these form submissions. So as a reminder, a form is a series of inputs with a submit button. So let's go ahead and connect this form to Webflow Logic. There are two ways to do that. First, I'm going to show you how to do it directly from the form. Let's go into settings in the top right. And then in source, I'm going to go ahead and collect logic. So that says that form submissions to this form should go to a logic flow. Here I can specify if I already have flows or create a new one. So let's go ahead and create a new flow. And that brings us to the flow editor. Again, quick overview of what we're seeing here. In the middle is a visual representation of the steps that our flow will take. So here we're saying on form submission, go ahead and do these things. We haven't specified those things, but we will in just a moment. On the left are the different actions you want your flow to take. So we can send an internal email notification, create CMS items, or the one we're going to use very often is make HTTP request. Now, if you don't know what HTTP is, totally fine. I will explain it in just a moment. It is a protocol that we use on the web for two services to communicate to each other, and then conditional rules. On the right is specification or configurations for each step. So right now we're at the flow level configurations. Let's call this send form submissions to services. There we go. Now we've named our flow and we've already connected to the email form that I showed you a moment ago. So that was the revision part. Next step here is to go ahead and send these form submissions to Airtable. To do that, we're going to use the make HTTP request. Just going to drag that in. There we go. And just a moment on what is an HTTP request. So the HTTP protocol is how two applications on the web communicate to each other. This is how Webflow is going to send Airtable the data that is in that form submission. Now, Airtable is going to have questions for Webflow. It's going to say, hey, do you have access to this Airtable base that you want to create a record in? What do you want to do? Do you want to create information? Do you want to read information that's already in that base? And if you do want to create or update or do something, what is it that you want to do? So the HTTP protocol is simply a way for two applications to understand each other. They have rules, right? So it's a way of authenticating, of saying what you want to do, and then specifying what it is that you want to do. So again, we're going to go step by step here, make sure that you understand how to use this protocol, no matter what application it is that you're using. So again, if there are any questions about anything I'm covering today, please drop them in the chat, and I'm going to either go respond to them as I go, or at the end, we'll have a specific time for Q&A. So please don't hesitate to drop questions in the chat. So let's go and specify and configure our first API call, HTTP request. So I'm going to call this send to Airtable. Now, as we go through this, you'll notice that every application that we use today is going to have a very similar structure, very similar steps. So the first thing we need to specify, just going to zoom in here, is the authentication. Now, I know that it is API token, which is what most of the applications we're going to use today use. But let's go ahead and go to the Airtable API documentation to make sure that that is the case. So I'm going to click on Airtable here. I'm going to go to my leads table. And our goal is that form submissions create a new record in this table. So I want them to appear as a new record. There are 3 fields in my table: name, email, and status. So I want the name and the email of the submitter to be filled in a new record. Now, to go to the Airtable documentation, in any base, click Help, go to API documentation. I already have mine open right here. And on the left, you're going to find your tables. So you have leads table, and I have my other table right here. What I want to do, these are the options. These are the things you can do in that leads table. You can list the records, retrieve a record, or create a record. Now, our goal is to create a new record in the leads table when a form is submitted. So this is my documentation right here. So you'll notice here I have an authorization header. Let me zoom in. It says authorization bearer your API key. And this is in the HTTP protocol, how Airtable will know that Webflow is allowed to make this API call and where it wants to create data. So I'm going to use the API key authorization. My header name is authorization. I need to put the word bearer, and then we need to figure out how to put our API key in this call. So coming back to Webflow here, I'm going to add it to the header because we saw that H at the beginning. The header name here is authorization. So again, this might not feel familiar, but these are simply how the protocols or the two applications speak to each other according to this HTTP protocol. Let me zoom out. Then we're going to go ahead and select a credential. I don't have any credentials. I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to call this Airtable API key. Now you might be wondering, why do we have a modal here? It's because we only want you to authenticate once because your API key is what gates access to your information. So no one could see it. So you can only see this pop up once. Once you've inputted an API token, no one can retrieve or see it. That way it's secure and Webflow is taking care of it. So let's go ahead and go get our Airtable API key. Let's go into our account. So I clicked here, I went to account, and you'll notice that I can create a new token. This is creating a set of random digits and numbers or symbols that will represent my access to my Airtable base. So let's create a new token. I'm going to call this Webflow to Airtable. Actually, that's a search. I need to click this create new token. There we go. So I don't want to write the word create. I want to say Airtable, Webflow to Airtable. If I can type, there we go. And I have to specify the scopes. The scopes is if you have access to this API key, what are you allowed to do in this Airtable account? Now, what I want to do is I want to write records. So I want to create, edit, and delete records. So that is the scope I need to provide to this token in order to accomplish what it is that I want to do. Next, I can further scope. I can restrict access to certain bases in my Airtable account. Now, it's very important that you limit the scopes as much as possible in case you ever show your API key inadvertently to someone. Maybe you have a stream and you show it on the stream and someone wants to, mess around with you. I know you won't do that because we're amongst friends here, but you should always restrict your API key to the minimum amount of scopes and access points as possible. So I'm going to give this API key access to my leads base. This is the base we're in a moment ago. So we're going to go ahead and create that. Now, Airtable is taking some time to generate a token. I'm not sure why. There we go. You always have to trust that it works correctly. Let's go back into Webflow. And let's go ahead and copy paste that API key in here. So bearer and then the API key. So just one more time, if we go back to our API documentation, I've just added this first header that says that our authorization is the word bearer and then our API key giving me access to my Airtable base. There we go. Let's create that. And now we've done step one. The second step is specifying which request method. So this is saying, what do you want to do in the Airtable table or the Airtable base that you're connecting to? Now, if you were here 2 weeks ago, you'll remember the acronym CRUD: create, read, update, and delete. Those are the 4 things you can do with applications. So I can create a record, I can update a record, I can delete a record. Each one of those operations maps to a request method, a verb that tells Airtable what it is that we want to do. So if you want to create, you'll use post. If you want to read, you'll use get. If you want to update, you'll use patch. And if you want to delete, you'll use delete. Now, if you want a more in-depth kind of look at this, watch the stream 2 weeks ago where I really speak about each one of these one by one. We're going to go ahead and use post. Now you might say, I don't watch your streams. How would I know this? Through the documentation. If I go back here, you notice there's the verb post right here. And that is telling me I can use post. There we go. So now we've specified our request method. So going down, we have our URL. This is how Airtable will know which base you want to create information in. So it's a way to route the information to the right place. Hey, Maria, welcome to the stream. Excited to have you. So our URL, again, is going to be specified in the documentation. Every API will be different. So let's go back into our documentation. I've zoomed in on the code, and you'll notice the URL right here. Now let's break this down really quickly. We have a root URL, which is api.airtable.com, our app ID, which is unique to our base, and then our table name. So you'll notice these URLs have a certain structure that tell you where the information is going. So let me make sure I've copied that. Let's go here. Let's paste that. Let me zoom out just to remember we're about 75% of the way there. Go us, we're doing great. Next, we're going to specify the header. So these are any additional things you need to specify between two APIs to make sure that they understand each other. We only have one in the Airtable, which is the content type that we're going to send. This is telling Airtable that if we want to create information, we're going to send our information in what we call application JSON, a JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which is this format right underneath. So let's create that header. I'm going to call this content type. Let me make sure I've got the right content type, capital C, capital T, very important. That could have been a mistake. And let me go ahead and paste. And we're simply application JSON. I've probably written application JSON hundreds of times and I could still never remember how to write it and what capitalized. So copy pasting is the secret. There we go. Last step is the body. Let me zoom in here. And this is saying, okay, Webflow Airtable understands who you are, what you want to do. It's telling me, asking us what record, what information do you want to put in the record? What is the name? What is the email? And what status do you want? My recommendation here is always to copy a sample. Let's copy this. Let's paste it here. And this is JavaScript object notation. We've got our sideways mustaches always in pairs. So this one with this one with this one. And it's saying, okay, create a record with the following fields specified in this way. So the name is going to be Aron. The email is going to be test@gmail.com. And the status is going to be new lead. So I'm not going to make this dynamic. Let's test this out, make sure that it works. And then we're going to use the inputs from our form. So let's run this test. I don't know how confident you are. I'm feeling pretty confident. Always a little nervous when I run these live on the stream. Let's go ahead and run test. There we go. It says that it was successful and it's returning us. Airtable is telling us I've created a record with ID record, the following fields. Name is Aron, email is test, and status is new lead. Thank you, Colleen, for the confidence. I appreciate that. Let's go to leads. Let's make sure that it worked. We see that it's worked. And you might say, well, was this actually created on the stream? So if we open up that record, we see that it was created by API 30 seconds ago. So that was done live. Congratulations to us. There we go. Though the final step before we can say that this is complete is we want these fields to be using the form input. So we want this to be dynamic so that the form, we want the form's submission information to show up here. So I can click here and takes information from previous steps. So I want the name to be the first name, space, last name, and then email, same thing. I want to pull from the form fields from step one, the email, but I always want status to be new lead. So let me zoom out and let's try the whole flow. So let me test. My name is Aron testing. Actually, my first name is Aron. My last name is testing, and it's Aron10@webflow.com is my email. And our expectation here is that this creates a record with Aron testing and the email Aron10@webflow.com, and the status is new elite. So let's run that test. And let's make sure that it works. There's a question in the chat, have we covered Mailchimp yet? We have not. That's this next one. So you've come at the right time. It says my test was successful. Let's make sure that that was the case. I go to leads, I see Aron testing, and we have new lead. So we've now connected Webflow to Mailchimp. So that was the first integration I wanted to show you. So that is how you take information from Webflow, from a form submission, and create a new record in Airtable using the make HTTP request action. Now, so that was the appetizer, entree. No, appetizer is the right word. Appetizer for the 3 APIs or tools we're going to cover today. The next thing I want to show you is how to connect Webflow to Mailchimp. How to take a form submission and send it or create a new member in a list in Mailchimp. So we're going to do this again. So I'm going to go show you how to connect to the API step by step. And you might notice some similarities between what we've just done with Airtable and how you do it with Mailchimp. But I want you to spend particular kind of or look at the particularities. So every API is different, it's unique, and it has its own what I call quirks. So Mailchimp has a few. So focus on those, and that'll help you understand how to read API documentation and use them, whether or not you're using Airtable, Mailchimp, or Slack. That was my little tip for you. Let's go ahead and jump back into Webflow, and let's go ahead and connect Webflow to Mailchimp to create new contacts in Mailchimp. So I'm going to use another make HTTP request. We're going to call it send to Mailchimp. And let me know in the chat if you are a Mailchimp user. And I would love to hear from you if this is a use case that you find interesting. Let's go ahead and hide here. So as always, we're going to start with authentication. And 99% of APIs out there use API token. So we're going to select it. But to understand what the authorization header is, let's go to Mailchimp. And I'm here in the basics API. There are 2 ways to authenticate: using username and password and authorization bearer. I would recommend using this one right here. That's the one I prefer, and that's the one we're going to cover today. Very similar to before, we have authorization, bearer, and then the token. So let's go ahead and set that up. We're going back here. We're going to add it to the header. We're calling this authorization again. And we're going to add a new credential. We're going to add a new one. Let me zoom out. There we go. We're going to call this Mailchimp. It's going to be an API token. And let's go ahead and find our API token in Mailchimp. I'm going to go to my mailing list. Actually, no, to find your API key, and this took me a little bit of time to figure out. You go to your account, you click here, you go to profile, you go to extras, you go to API key, and then you create a new API key. So I'm going to copy that, bring it here. We're going to call that bearer. Actually, capital B, bearer, and then paste. Let me make sure that that is correct. Good. I'm going to go back here, authorization. We've called our header authorization, bearer, and then the token itself. That is perfect. Let's create. And now we have authenticated. That was step 1. Now Webflow, when sending information, will be able to say, I actually have access to this list. I can create new members in this list. Next is the request method. Again, a reminder, CRUD, create, read, update, delete. If you want to create information that maps to post. So let's go ahead and select post. Let's double check with the documentation. So I'm going to go into the documentation itself. I've navigated to, you'll notice that the Mailchimp API has a lot of things you can do. I've gone to members and then add member to list. And I've gone here to add a member to the list. So the way you add a new member to a list is that you specify the list ID in the URL, and then provide that user, that contact's email address, and a few other parameters. You'll notice here that there's the word post. So we have used the right method. We are going to post information to this URL. So far, so good. Again, if you have any questions throughout, please drop them in the chat. So Richard asked, will there be a replay? Yes, right after the stream, you can watch everything we've covered today or any other of the Webflow live streams. So please feel free to drop them in the chat. Next, we have the URL. The URL is how Mailchimp will know which list you want to add a member to. It is how you route information to the right place. So I'm going to go back to the documentation. And then I see this list ID, and then members. So this looks like a partial URL. It's missing the root. The root is all API calls start with a root, and then depending on the list and what you want to do, have different URLs. So let's actually go back to the fundamentals documentation, and we have URL right here in the authentication. And you'll notice that the URL is HTTPS, and then DC, not sure what that is, and then API mailchimp.com/3.0. So this is the root URL. We have to figure out what DC is. So if I go to my Mailchimp, and this is explained in the documentation, I can't zoom in here, but you'll notice that the beginning of my URL is US9. And this is the server I'm connecting to when I create my Mailchimp instance, for instance. And so I actually need to use that US9 in my API URL. And this is what I mean by quirks. Airtable does not care which server you connect to. It does not ask you to specify that, but Mailchimp does. And so these are the little quirks or things that are unique with each API that might trip you up. So I want to make sure to cover at least examples of these, so whatever API you're connecting to, you can understand and use. So I need to take this US9 and include it in my Webflow API call. So let's just reconstruct that URL. So I'm going to copy this right here. I'm going to go here. I'm going to go like that. And I'm going to replace DC by US9. So that's step one. We now have our root URL. Next, if I go to the endpoint, you'll notice that there's some other information here. It's /list, /list ID, /members. So I need to find my list ID so that I can connect that member to the right list in Mailchimp. If I go over here, this is my list. If I go to settings, audience name and defaults, if I'm not mistaken, it is right here, audience ID. So I'm going to copy paste that. Actually, let me copy paste all of this. Let's add it to this right here. And let's select this like so. And let's paste our audience ID. Now I'm just going to make sure that this is correct. There we go. That seems right. Whoops. Let me click back into here. Let me zoom back into the URL. So US9, I've got my root.3.0/list, and you can see it /my audience ID /members. This is telling Mailchimp that's where I want to add this new member. That was a URL. So two quirks, you need to figure out what your root URL is. It's not shown in the documentation. And second, you need to specify the US9, which server it is that you're connecting to, which is automatically done by Mailchimp. You have new control over that. So next, what headers? Let's go into the documentation one more time. Let me click here. And I do not see any additional headers. So it seems like we do not need to specify that we are sending application JSON. We may need to. Let's see together whether we need to do that. Let me just make sure. It just says user any. I do not see application JSON. So next step is to specify the body. So let's go ahead and see what the body looks like. Let me go into the documentation. And there's quite a bit here. There's email address, email type. If I look at the body parameters, there are only two that are required: email address and status. So let's go ahead and create a body with those two. So open curly sideways mustache, close it. And I'm taking a risk here by not copy pasting. I'm going to try to do it live. So we said email address. Let's go ahead and copy paste that. Email address. Like so. Let's remove required. And let's just the test go Aron testing at webflow.com. Like so. And then comma. That is how you separate your fields, your inputs. Next, it says status. And like so. Status. Let's remove the required. And then subscribed. This is telling that you are allowed to send me emails. So that is our body. Let's double check here. We have email address, email type, status. They have other stuff like merge field, interest that we don't need. That seems about right. Seems good. So let's go ahead and test this out. We're going to run this whole HTTP request, this API call to create a new member that is currently not dynamic. It is just Aron testing at webflow.com. Status is subscribed. Let's see how this works. I don't know about you. I don't know how confident you are. Let's go ahead and run this test. And let's see what Mailchimp returns. What we're hoping it returns is confirmation that it's created a new contact. That's the response. We see that we have email address. We have a unique ID, so it worked. Good job to us. So far, we're good to go. Let's make sure in Mailchimp that we see this as a contact, that it's worked correctly. Thank you. Yes, success. Whew. My heart rate goes up and then down. That's awesome. Let's go here. Let's go into our overview of our list. Here we go. We have 11 contacts now. Let's see who those contacts are. There we go. Aron testing at webflow.com is now a member of our list. The last step is to go ahead and connect Aron, this input, to our form fields. So let's click plus. Let's go into form fields, and we want email address, like so. And that's it. If we had other merge fields that we wanted to input, like name and additional information, you can have those as specific inputs into your body. There we go. So let's test the whole flow. Now, the whole flow should first create a record in Airtable and then create a contact or a member in our Mailchimp list. So let's test. I need to keep remembering examples. So Aron testing 2. I'm very imaginative here. Testing at webflow.com. So it should do two things. First, create a record in Airtable. And then second, create a contact in Mailchimp. Let's run that test. Heart rate goes up. And then it's going to go down, hopefully, if everything went well. Now is a good time to go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. I'm seeing some, and I'm going to go ahead and answer them either at the end or throughout as I see them. So let's make sure that this worked. Let's go into Airtable. Let's go into leads. We see Aron testing 2. Good job. Next, if we go to our list right here, and now you might not see it, but if I refresh, if things went well, we should see it now. There we go. Aron testing 2 at webflow.com. So pro tip, make sure to refresh before you think your API calls or your flow didn't work. That's definitely an error that I've done many, many times. So that was step 2, how to connect Webflow with Mailchimp to create a new contact. So I'm seeing some questions that I might be missing. I want to go through the 3 API calls, and then I will kind of go back and answer the questions. But keep dropping in the chat. Folks are relaying them to me. There was some doubt about whether we could get through the 3 APIs, so I want to make sure that we do that, make sure everyone gets at least the basics running, and then we'll answer any questions in the chat. Okay, cool. So that was how to connect Webflow to Mailchimp. The second kind of popular app that I wanted to show you. So now you can take your submissions, add them to your database in Airtable, add them to your email marketing service in Mailchimp. The third kind of tool I want to cover today is Slack. So Slack allows this integration between Webflow and Slack will allow you to send Slack messages from a bot. So being able to send submissions to a Slack channel. Examples of when you'd like to do this is maybe you want a moment in your workflow. Maybe when a form is submitted, that it kicks off a review process and you need to go ahead and send a message to a Slack channel to let folks know that that workflow needs to be kicked off. So we're going to go ahead and connect Webflow forms to a Slack message sent by a bot in a Slack message of your choice. This one integration, I wouldn't say is more tricky. It's just that it's a little unique because we are not going to send the message as ourselves. We're going to send the message as a bot that we're creating and integrating into the into Slack. So without further ado, let's jump back into Webflow and let's understand how all of this works. So let's go to the browser. Appreciate all the questions and the patience. I will get to those questions. Really appreciate it. I do want to make sure we get through the 3 integrations. So we're back here in Webflow Logic. And just like before, we're going to go ahead and make an HTTP request. So this is Webflow sending information to Slack, more specifically to a Slack bot, letting them know that they need to send a message. So we're going to call this send Slack message, like so. Let's go into authentication. It's going to be an API token. We're going to add it to the header, but let's go first to the documentation to understand what we should call that header and how credentials work. So I'm going to close down Airtable, Mailchimp. So let's go to Slack and I'm going to go to chat post message. So I'm here in the Slack API documentation, and this is the bot documentation. To integrate with Slack, the way you automate in sending messages anyway in Slack is to first create a bot that you use through the API. So I'm essentially saying we're going to use the chat post message endpoint. We're going to post to this URL, authenticated as a bot, and that bot needs to have chat write authorization scopes in order to send the message that we want. So let's just spend a moment understanding how we create a bot and what kind of scopes we need to provide. So in the essence of time, I've set this up before, but essentially you go to, let me just open this up. Here we go. I've created a bot called Logic. It's very simple to create a bot. And in basic information, I've simply filled out the kind of basic information that I need, and I've installed the app in my workspace. I've authenticated into my workspace into my Slack instance. And then in OAuth and permissions, I've asked for an API key. So once I have that, you have to imagine that you are just like the bot. So instead of using the API documentation directly, we're going to use it as if we were this bot. And the only difference is that we need to use this API token instead of our user API token. And here at the bottom, I've given it some scopes. So these are the things this bot can do. So I've let it join a workspace, in channels in a workspace, read messages, most importantly, write messages, and write public. So these are the scopes that I've given this bot in order to be able to do the things I wanted to do. In our case, that's simply send a message. This might be a little wider than you absolutely need, but I wanted to make sure that any scopes that I give it could be maybe a little relaxed and I could use them later. So the most important one, I think, if we go to the documentation, is chat write. So in order to use this endpoint chat.postMessage, you need to go ahead and have chat write. So let's go back into our documentation. But first, now that we have the token, let's also understand how we authenticate. So I'm just here in the basic app setup, and you have calling API method. This is how you call APIs. We have a URL like so, and then we say header, authorization, bearer, and then the token itself. So this should feel very familiar. We're going to call it authorization. We're going to put the word bearer in front, and then we're going to go ahead and put our API token. So just like before, we're calling this authorization. We're going to create a new credential. Let me zoom out. There we go. The name is going to be Slack bot API token, like so. And we're going to put the word bearer. Let me just make sure it's a capital. It is. I'm going to go into here. I'm going to copy this right here. Space. And now we have authenticated into our bot. So now we can write messages as if we were the logic bot that we created. Create. There we go. Now we're going to select a request method. This is what we want the bot to do. We want it to send a message, which is creating new information in a Slack channel. So it is post, selecting post. If you aren't familiar with CRUD, create, read, update, delete, you can go here and we see that we have post right there as our verb, as our method. I'm actually going to go ahead and copy this URL right here while we're here, which is the next step. Paste. So we're saying go to slack.com/API/chat post message. Now you'll notice a difference with other APIs. There's no concept of routing. It doesn't know what channel it wants to write on, doesn't know what workspace. It's figuring those out in other places. It's going to figure out the workspace based on the token you've provided. And then the channel is going to come in the body in just a moment. So next, let's go here. We need to specify, are there any other headers? We see that it takes two different types of content type. So we need to specify the content type that we want to use. We're going to use application JSON. Actually, I didn't think that was a click. Let me just go back. Let me just copy this. And just like before, we're going to use the header, content type, and application JSON. So now we've specified the header. Let me just select that back. And the final step is the body. The body is what message do we want to send and what channel do we want to send that message to. So if I go back to the endpoint, I can see here we have arguments. The token we've passed in as authorization. We don't need to send it in the body. Next, we have the channel. So let's go ahead and open. I really need to learn what those sideways mustaches real name is. So let's open that. Let's go here and let's copy channel. And let me zoom in here. Channel. And we want the channel. Whoops, let me undo that. There we go. And now we need the channel ID. So how do we find our channel ID? You can go to any channel, click on the channel's description, and the channel ID is at the bottom. Let's come here. Let's paste. Let's close, comma to separate fields. Let's go back into here. And then we want the text. So this is what you want your message to be. Let me zoom in. We have different things we can attach. We're simply going to use the simplest one, which is text. We can just specify the text. Let me come here. We're just going to say text. And I'm going to use hello world, just like in the example, just to make sure that this works as expected. There we go. And let's test this specific flow. So what this does, it's going to authenticate as the bot. It's going to go to, I've specified it to the live stream channel, and it's simply going to send hello world as our message. Let's run the test. It is not dynamic. It is not based on our form field. And Syed, thank you for confirming that curly mustaches is the correct name. Thank you. And then we have our message, right? So it's returning and saying, this user ID has sent this message. Here's the message that I've sent. If I go over here, hello world. Whew, very proud of that, actually. Let me zoom in here. There we go. Now we've sent hello world. Very cool. Let's make this dynamic. Our final step here. And what I want this message to say is we have a new lead, and I want to input the first name and the last name from step one. So form fields, first name. Let me zoom out, click here. Let me actually put a little space here so they're not one next to each other. There we go. Clicking plus, going to form fields, allowing us to pull information from previous step, last name, and let's go ahead and run the whole flow. Let's do the whole thing. I think we are confident what it's going to do. Every form submission is going to go ahead and create a record in Airtable, create that member in a Mailchimp list, and send a Slack message as our logic bot. Let's go ahead and apply changes. Let's test the whole flow. So my name is Aron. My last name is testing143, making sure that this is random. And my email is 1234@webflow.com. So this should do three things: create a contact in Airtable, create a record in Airtable. It should next create a member in our Mailchimp list, and finally go ahead and send a Slack message as a bot in our live stream channel. It's doing a lot. I feel like Webflow Logic is doing so much work for us. I almost feel bad. So let's run that test. And then we can go and check in each application whether it's working correctly. Boom. Seems to have worked. Let's double check. I go to leads, testing 1, 2, 3, close down Airtable. Let's go to Mailchimp. Let's go to our list. Remember, always refresh. Aron 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's close that down. And if we go to the live stream, we have a new lead, Aron testing 1, 4, 3. Whew, amazing. So now let's last step. Let's go ahead and turn this on. Let's apply the changes. And then if we were to deploy our website and submit the form, we would have the whole flow. So we did it. We've now connected 3 different tools in one flow that will always kind of get the information automatically. So I'm extremely proud of all of you for following along and doing this with me. Now, we have a bunch of questions in the chat. So let me open up my little chat here, and now's a good time. If you want to keep dropping questions into the chat, I'm just going to look here, and let me bring up the questions one by one. Really appreciate your patience with the questions. Okay, so first question from Wazi is, what if we want to connect Webflow to Mailchimp and not to any other tools? Will the process be the same? The answer is absolutely. It will be exactly the same. Let me show you exactly how you would do it. If I go back to the browser, you do create flow on, send to Airtable. You can remove that, and you simply send to Mailchimp. So you don't have to take the whole flow. You can just take the actions that you wanted to take. So you'll connect your flow to the form submission and then send to Mailchimp. I will have a clonable link in the description right after the stream that you can bring to your instance or to your Webflow dashboard and replicate this flow. So Wazi, thank you so much for that question. Okay, next question from Gap. Some tokens have expiration times. Is it possible to refresh tokens automatically? The answer is no. There is no way to trigger a Webflow flow on a schedule. So there is no way to refresh those tokens automatically. I imagine you are doing something like OAuth and getting a single token. So you cannot run flows on a schedule today. So you will have to manually refresh those tokens. Okay, so the question from Richard, is there a way to automatically set specific tags for those entries? I'm going to assume that, Richard, you're asking the question when in regards to Mailchimp, right? So can you tag subscribers with specific tags when they enter Mailchimp or any other kind of email marketing service, a way of identifying different contacts beyond the members? Will answer you, I'm not sure. Let's actually give a quick look to the documentation and see what's possible. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to close Slack. Let's go into Mailchimp. Let's go add member to list. And I see merge fields as an object. So meaning that those are properties of the contacts, like additional, maybe country of residence, things like that. So those seem to be possible to add. And then I don't see tags, but maybe there are tags. Okay, let me just bring here tags. So you can add an array of tags. So if you were to tag 1, tag 2, tag 3, you would have square brackets, not curly mustaches, of each tag that you want to include. So if I go into here, let me see if they have an example. Seems to be the last tags. like so. So here you would put tags as a input on your body, semicolon, and then square brackets, and separated by commas of every tag you want to put in. So the answer is yes. Simply you have to modify the body. Whew, this is fun. So let me know, Richard, if I've answered your question. Hopefully I have. Just trying to size this correctly. Okay, square mustaches. That is correct. Square mustaches. Okay. A question from Ozordi. Is there a way to build a web app using Airtable in Webflow? I mean, it depends what you mean by a web app. I think what we built today is a web app. It takes information in and sends it to various systems. You can build pretty complex web apps on top of Webflow, with Logic being your logic layer, your business logic layer. So I would answer the question is yes, all depending on what type of web app it is that you want to build. So we do have about 10 minutes here. I'm happy to answer more questions. Go ahead and drop them in the chat. And Nelson, thank you for dropping them to me so I can ask them. Okay, so the question from Elkin, or Elshin, I'm not sure, hopefully I'm saying your name right, is how to deal with input fields which are not supported by Webflow natively. That is true, especially when it comes to conditional logic. You can't necessarily route your flow based on every single input type. So things like a single select, a select field, or a date, you cannot route based on those inputs. So that is not possible today in Webflow Logic. But there are other tools that you can use. There are tools in our apps marketplace which may be able to do that. So Elkin, that is a limitation of Webflow Logic. The team is aware of that limitation, and I'll let them know your feedback that this is stopping you from creating more powerful websites on top of Webflow. So question from Lars, can I start a flow every time a new deployment on the site has happened? The answer is no. So currently the two triggers for Logic flows are form submissions and webhooks. Theoretically, I think you could probably use the Webflow native Webflow webhooks, but I'm not quite sure if those are supported as an input. But that might be a way around, Lars, what you're trying to do, which is use Webflow webhooks when the flow is published to trigger a flow. Okay, those were the questions from today. So we did a lot today. In 45 minutes, I think, I'm sure that we connected Webflow to three different applications. I'm not sure how much time it took us. So we connected Webflow to Airtable to create records. We've connected it to Mailchimp to create new members on a list. And third, we've gone ahead and sent a Slack message as a bot. We did all of that in about 45 minutes. Now, I hope that even if you don't use those tools in your business, what you'll take away from this week's workflow series is those building blocks of APIs so you can truly connect to anything that you use in your business. So a huge thanks for you all for joining us today. I'm Aron Korenblit. The workflow series is every 2 weeks. So I'll be back in 2 weeks. Nelson will be back Wednesday next week, same time, same place, talking about how to create a notification bar. And I'm seeing some questions in the chat. I do encourage you to reach out to support or go to the Discord forum. We're always happy to help. But with that said, I'm okay, really quickly, Wazi, there's a question of, will there be an episode on Webflow to HubSpot? We did that 2 weeks ago. So if you go back to the Webflow YouTube channel, you'll find how to connect to HubSpot. So with that question answered, I hope, wishing you all a great week. I hope to see you back here next week with Nelson and 2 weeks from now with me for another workflow series. It is a huge joy and honor to come on here every 2 weeks and help you guys build better workflows. Thank you so much for joining. Wishing you a great rest of the week. Bye, everyone.